Okay, so like I said before, I introduce Amy, let me quickly cover the few housekeeping topics. All the participants will basically be on mute during the entire session. You feel free to ask question at any point during the presentation. So you can use the question and answer option or the chat option available at the control panel of your screen. And lastly, at the last, we will reserve around 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer your queries. With that note, we open our today's webinar, and we are very lucky to have Emmy with us today. She is Senior Manager of Education and Learning Technology for American Dental Hygienist Association, called ADHA. Emmy is helping to expand and improve the organization's continuing education curriculum and LMS experience for thousands of ADHA members across the United States. Prior to this, Amy has spent around 6 years as a senior instructor designer for International Association of Firefighters in Washington, where she specialized in building leadership development and diversity and inclusion training programs. Also, she has a master's degree in instructor technology and e-learning, and is currently working towards a doctoral degree in educational leadership with an emphasis in, I would say, instructor design and technology from Idaho University. Yes, so that's where I welcome you, Amy. Pleasure to have you here, and really excited for this session where you would be talking about, the digital strategies, learning strategies. We know nowadays, we are having this environment where we also need classroom and ILT sessions, and also the online learning or e-learning, you can say, would definitely be, this session will definitely be helpful in terms of understanding what strategies or best practices we can adopt from this learning.
Thank you so much for having me, Deepa. I appreciate it. She's going to pull a poll up really quickly, because before we get started, I would kind of love to know what your organization is currently doing right now. So, are you mostly in person? Do you have kind of a hybrid model where you do some in person and then some instructor live taught, synchronous online? So that would be something like everybody in a Zoom room together. Do you do in person and asynchronous online? So something is completely, they go through it by themselves. So asynchronous means that they are totally on their own without an instructor. I know that there's a good combination out there. I'm going to give the poll about 30 more seconds here, but I'm seeing some good responses right now. So it looks like there's a pretty good mix. You can go ahead, Deepa, and end the poll and show those results.
Sure, I'll do that quickly.
So this is actually really, really interesting that it's kind of across the board. So when we're talking about digital learning, we see that it kind of can mean different things. So there's a different scope depending on whether or not you actually have an instructor in the room and everybody's in Zoom, or you have that asynchronous online where there's no instructor, it's completely self-paced, and they have to basically be responsible for their own learning. So, and I see kind of a mix here of everyone. So I'm going to try to touch on kind of different aspects of both instructor live taught and asynchronous online. I've done a little bit of both. But again, there are some similar elements that you can add, but there's also some uniqueness to both of those things. So you can go ahead and move slides. I mean, I've already kind of touched on this. So those digital learning strategies. So how to kind of engage learners in both that Zoom room format, or again, the asynchronous online where there's no instructor and the accountability is really dependent on that student sitting in front of the e-learning lesson and completing it. Next slide, please. So our biggest challenges that I have found is translating in-person content to online. So especially when COVID hit, this became way more prevalent. So I don't know about any of you out there, but I know a lot of times as an instructional designer, they'll hand you a bunch of stuff and say, hey, we want to teach this online now. And you're like, what? So making sure that you can take that in-person content and make it digital and make it effective in digital and still meet those same learning goals is definitely a challenge. Creating learner buy-in, that's a big one. So how do you actually motivate learners to complete your course and how do you keep them engaged? And then finally, accessibility. Accessibility is something that everyone in the instructional design field should have some kind of knowledge of. And I know sometimes it seems like a bit of a beast and can be hard to do. So I just have some thoughts on accessibility that I'm going to share with you and a couple of resources. So in-person to online, this is what I found works the best is take your content and break it down. So one of the examples, I had to do some union leadership training on, so the International Association of Firefighters, working for them as a senior instructional designer, we have 324,000 members. So our audience, there's a lot of potential there. We mostly focused our training on union leaders. And especially with COVID and especially with unions kind of on the decline, a lot of our training was about kind of creating, helping union leaders to stay engaged with their membership. And we had a lot of this union leadership training that we were putting out there. And they were like, you know what, we want to be able to offer this more online. So we had to kind of take that content and break it down. So there's the text and resources. So there's those physical things that you can, there's the test that you give them at the end. There's the textbook. There's the physical contents that you have. And then there's the interactivity. So one of the ones for this course was the students would write on pieces of paper in the room some of the biggest challenges that they faced as union leaders to kind of keep their membership engaged. And we would put those sticky notes on the wall. And then a lot of the content was talking through kind of some techniques for engagement, some resources, some ways to engage your membership. And that was kind of the content. And then of course, the instructor impact. The instructor brings a lot of knowledge to that class because they've had certain scenarios that they've dealt with. They've been union leaders for a long time. So they bring something to the table as well. So you had to kind of figure out what those three pieces of your course are. And then, when you're asking yourself, is this going to work online? You need to ask yourself kind of these questions, which are your learning objectives. Which ones can you meet without that interactivity? So if you take just that content, that physical text content, and put it in a digital format, it's not best practice to just throw it on a screen, have them read it, take a test, and woohoo, they learned something. But, what learning objectives can you meet? Like if they're supposed to list, list 3 things that they learned, you can easily do that online, right away. However, you have to figure out how your instructor and activities play into the success of your learning objectives. So for this course, one of the learning objectives was, describe strategies for keeping your membership. So describe strategies to combat common barriers to membership, right? How do you do that online? So how do you assess that they can describe a strategy in an asynchronous online format? Well, it's very difficult to do. So, you really have to think about that. And then can you measure and assess the outcome? So again, how do you measure, describe or explain when you're in an asynchronous online format? So those are the questions we had to ask ourselves. Next slide, please. So then you have to restructure that content, right? So now you have your questions, you have those activities, and you have a purpose for those activities. So these are kind of some of my favorite ways to replace an in-person activity. Discussion boards, collaboration tools, and then any of your e-learning software is going to have things like Click and Learn, rollovers, accordion, word clouds. But I'm going to focus on those collaboration tools. So for this course that I was designing, again, we have to discuss strategies to engage our membership. That's our learning goal. That's our objective. So what we did was we had them within the asynchronous online course, we had them go to Padlet. Padlet is basically like a free software that creates like a giant sticky note board. So people could go online and they could actually share what their biggest challenge was, just like we did in that in-person format. They could go on to Padlet and they shared what their biggest challenge was. And so now we had a collection and leaders could see when they were taking the course, they could see what other leaders have put on there. So if this course was open for 2 weeks, or we had a deadline that was 2 weeks, within that 2 weeks, we had lots of people sharing what their biggest challenge was. And then over time, they would continue to, we would make that collection. And when we did our kind of needs analysis and we were writing the content for this course, we knew what a lot of those challenges would be. So the content really covers a lot of those challenges. But we use that Padlet as kind of a way to engage the class right away, to get their feedback. And the content, it covered a lot of those aspects. And we tried to make sure that when we were talking to our SMEs and our leadership, that within the course content itself, we were engaging those students in strategies, we were giving them knowledge and resources. And then kind of our measurement of success. So again, how do you measure describing, that membership and what you need to do to keep your membership? We use kind of a mural mind map. So the students were tasked with, okay, here's your assessment. You're going to take one of those challenges. And after taking the course and learning strategies, now you're going to mind map out some ideas for combating that based on what you learned. And so other people could also see that same mind map and could share and could add to it. So now we had multiple strategies, multiple people getting engaged in that and being able to kind of print that and use that later. So you're still keeping that collaborative aspect, even though the students are never in the same room together. So these collaboration tools can be absolutely excellent. Some of them have a fee to them and some of them are free. I have worked with a tight budget for a long time. So a lot of resources are free or have free trials, free elements. So make sure to just kind of look into what they offer. For replacing the instructor brings a lot to the table. I really love kind of branching scenarios when you're doing asynchronous online. Recording video and audio, all of these tools are free. If you don't have a video editor, I highly recommend DaVinci Resolve. It is free. It's a very good software if you need free video editing. And same with Audacity is good for audio recordings. But find ways to get so you can have your instructors just get on a Zoom by themselves and record themselves talking through some content and then put that in your course. So kind of creative ways to engage the instructor and use them and use their knowledge. Of course, knowledge checks and assessments, make sure that you're always getting data. I'm going to emphasize this a ton of times throughout this course, but always get data. So even though we had the students do Miro and do mind maps, we still had them take a short assessment to gauge their learning. So we had data behind it at the end to say, hey, they did meet certain metrics and they did meet certain goals. So we could take that to our stakeholders and say, hey, they're still learning the same thing that they were learning in person, but now we're translating it in online. Surveys are also great. If you're doing instructor live taught, like via Zoom, some great resources are Kahoot, Socrative, quizzes. Those are all great programs to use with students and instructors for instructor live taught. And then of course, infographics, photo collages, GIFs, all of these things are great. So we had one aspect where the students were supposed to get resources to take home later, and Screen to GIF is completely free and you can just record yourself doing the steps. So it was, okay, you need to log in, you need to go here, here, and there's your resources. So we just created a looping GIF and we recorded ourselves, click here, log in, click here, here you go. And it just looped on the screen. So it's very easy for them to digest that information because it's right there. And Screen to GIF is great. Again, another free resource that you can use. Next slide, please. So I would love to hear about what your biggest struggle is with online learning. You want to go ahead and launch the poll for me? Thank you.
Done.
Perfect. So tell me one of your biggest struggles. And if it's other, feel free to pop it in the chat. But I would love to hear what you guys kind of think. Again, these are just a few of the common struggles that I have seen personally and tried to combat over time. But there are a lot out there. I know it can be challenging. I'll give it a few more seconds to let a few more people respond. All right, Deepa, you can go ahead and end the poll and show those results.
Sure.
Thank you. So the biggest one seemed to be measuring success over time, which I absolutely agree that that is one of the most difficult challenges. And if I forget, I do have something to mention on that as we go through, but don't let me forget if I mention, or if I forget, somebody remind me. Course completion rate is tough, lack of budget and resources, that's always a big one. And then I see a couple of people in the chat, not enough participants in combating learner burnout and overwhelm. Those are all like really good responses. And hopefully we can touch on a couple things from my experiences that have kind of helped combat things. But now that I know where you guys are coming from, I completely understand. So we're going to learn a little bit about the analysis phase. Go ahead and go forward, please, Deepa. So when you're talking about learner buy-in and you're talking about getting their attention, keeping their attention, and trying to get them engaged in this course, buy-in is going to start with that analysis phase. And it's so easy to take the analysis phase for granted because you have a lot to think about. You have your budget, you have your resources, you have your stakeholders telling you you need to get this done in a certain time frame. So it's hard to just sit down and be like, you know what, I need more time before I start designing this course to really, really think about my learner and their needs. And a lot of these issues that you're seeing with motivation, with completing it, with burnout, is all going to be solved in this analysis phase, or at least alleviated in some way, shape, or form with this analysis phase. Next slide, please. So who are your learners? Okay, you probably have a picture in your head, right? You know who your learners are because you work for an organization, you know that you have a certain audience that you're always engaged in. But just because you design courses for a certain group of people doesn't mean that their motivations are all the same. And I want you to keep that in mind as we are talking through this content, because it's very important to picture that you have different groups of people within your organization. No matter what the case is, I guarantee you that if you really dig down deep, you're going to find some differences among those people. And if you make some tweaks and changes, you're going to have a lot more success with your learner buy-in. I love this quote. It's from some research that I have found in my doctoral program for the importance of motivation in online learning. So motivation has been identified as a key factor in developing and sustaining a sense of community, as well as learning and achievement in online contexts. So there's two things in that quote. There's motivation and there's sense of community. And with the example I gave you before with translating online learning, those resources like Padlet, like Miro, creating those mind maps, getting engaged with one another, that's one component. Trying to keep that collaborative aspect in your online learning, even though they're virtual, is incredibly important. The other one is motivation. How do you get them there? So I'm just going to walk you through kind of an example from my organization. Again, I used to work with a lot of firefighters. For years, I was designing content and curriculum for firefighters. That was my audience, right? It's easy to take for granted that they're all firefighters, they're all in the same profession. And I was tasked with creating curriculum for an inclusive workforce. So diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. We had a lot of those in the fire service. And they really want to diversify the profession. It's always been a struggle. So they're like, okay, we need more curriculum on this topic. That was basically what I was given, right? So when I actually took some time to do the analysis, and you can go to the next slide, Deepa. What I learned was my motivation was very different based on who I was talking to. So I had the union leaders in the fire service. I had people who were actually like on DEI committees and were involved in DEI initiatives in their stations, in their locals. They cared about this topic, and it was really important to them to share this message. And then finally, there was just those regular everyday firefighters who were on shift, who were going to be taking this training, in the middle of their workday, and they may or may not care. So those are three very different audiences with three very different needs. And it's really hard for you to go to your boss and say, I need to create three different versions of this training and I need the time and the budget to do that, because these three people need very different things. And you're the expert. You need to do that. You need to be strong and say, I really need to make this happen. And this is why. And always have that analysis and that evidence. So I'm not going to read these bullet points out to you, but these were just some of the aspects of my learner that I got in that analysis phase. And how did I complete that? I talked to them. So I had leaders in the fire service that I would reach out to. I had surveys and I would just kind of ask, like, what do you need to know about this topic? What's important to you? What would make you sit through this course? Right. And one of the things I found, especially when you're talking about diversity initiative, I put representation matters on both of those. By representation, I mean, make sure that your training always has pictures, language, and things of that nature that represent everyone that you're trying to speak to. So, you want them to see themselves in that training, no matter what they look like, no matter their minority, majority status. Always have that representation in there. So next slide, please. So again, these were what we found were their motivators. This is what was going to put them in front of that computer and learn this topic. Again, I don't want to, read bullets off the screen for you, but for union leaders, they, need their membership to feel safe. They need to talk to one another. The training I referenced earlier, union leaders, the collaboration is so important to them. Being able to hear from other union leaders and being able to talk out loud was super important. So we knew we need that collaborative aspect. For DEI committee members, they want to preach this message to others. So resources are important. We need to give them things that they can take home to give to their learners. So even if they can't complete it in this online module, they need to be able to take it home and be like, hey guys, like, look at this. This is great information. And then finally, for the firefighters on shifts, it's really hard for them to do this and they may not even care, which was the biggest caveat. So we created it around kind of a teamwork aspect. Like, okay, well, you're all firefighters. So teamwork is how you successfully do your job. And without inclusivity in the fire service, you're losing that teamwork. So we tried to relate it to everyone. We tried to have a message that was like, this applies to everyone. Even if you fall into a majority category, diversity and making everyone in your station feel welcome is important to you and the success of your job. And you're all here for the same reason. So, that is a uniting factor, and that kind of creates that learner buy-in for them and gets them invested. And of course, ease of use is important because they're doing this on the job and they need to be able to do this quickly and effectively. Next slide, please. So again, not going to read word for word here, but how did we achieve this? So how did we do this diversity inclusion within a budget, within a time frame, getting our learners involved? So the shell was the same. Okay, I didn't have time to create 3 different trainings for 3 different people. So the template is the same. We started with our kind of attention getter. So we had scenarios, and these are real scenarios. I'm highly going to recommend going out and finding a real scenario. So if you're talking about somebody being, we were talking about diversity inclusion initiatives for the union leaders, there's a lot of issues with sexual harassment claims and having to combat that and make sure members are protected. So we went and we found actual examples to put in the module. So it was relatable. One of my biggest pet peeves in online learning is like, Sally goes to the store and she buys 3 lemons and, it just sounds fake. People don't want to hear about a scenario that's fake. They don't want some scenario that you throw on a screen with a little animated guy. It sounds fake. So make it real. Go out and find a real scenario that your learners can relate to when you're building scenarios for your online course. So again, we changed those scenarios for these 3 groups, but it kind of, led into their main motivation. We had a self-reflection exercise to kind of get them on board. And that self-reflection was basically like, hey, now that you've seen kind of the scenario, this is how it relates to you. And this is what we're going to learn about. So it wasn't just like, hey, welcome to this course. Here's your 3 learning objectives. Here's your content. It was, let's get them invested first. And then we'll talk about that, that self-reflection. again, this is totally them. There's not a lot of metrics behind this. It's hard to measure, but it's there. And then, but then that shows them kind of what they're going to learn. And you talk about their learning objectives and that self-reflection, because that's what we're going to try to focus on here. And then of course, the actual content itself was directly related to their needs. That was those points in those other slides. It was all in mini modules. So it was easy for them to complete no matter what their schedule was. A ton of take-home resources so they can hang it in their stations, they can give it to people later. And then we were able to schedule a follow-up component in person to assess the results of the assessments that they took within the module, the activities and things like that that were built into the course, and be able to kind of reinforce this. So that was an important aspect as well. Accessibility. I just put this in here because it's so important to just have these features in your course, even if you know nobody fits into a disabled category or into a neurodivergent. If your learners, anybody can benefit from this. You're going to, you're really not reaching someone. And one of my coworkers actually gave my favorite quote, with firefighters. She was saying, a lot of them, they can't be blind or they can't be deaf, or, she's like, I hear a lot of these stigmas from people who wonder why I put so much time into accessibility. She goes, but what about the person who breaks their hand and they can't use the mouse? Well, now you got to make sure that the tabbing function works, or they're in a busy station and somebody loses the headphones. Well, now that closed captioning is really important to that person. So you're helping them complete the course by adding these aspects because you're just making it easier and easier for somebody to use. Next slide, please. So here are some of my favorite accessibility tools. If you have existing videos or you have your instructor record videos, closed captioning them. If you have access to the Adobe Creative Suite, Premiere Pro has a awesome auto transcribing feature. You upload a video, you hit the transcribe sequence button, and it will auto caption that. And it has multiple languages. And I know for English, it's very effective. I absolutely love it. And then some of these are paid for resources, but they're very good and they're very effective. And then Zoom and YouTube, you can get a transcript, or you can put obviously a YouTube video up and turn on closed captioning. So those are options as well, but they're not quite as good as the actual resources themselves. And then once you have that closed caption file, so say you use Premiere Pro, I do this all the time. I close caption a video, I can save the video and I can save the closed caption file. And then I convert that file to any format I want using Happy Scribe. They have a free translation software. Then I can upload that file to Captivate, Storyline, Camtasia, whatever program that I'm using to do my video editing or to do my e-learning authoring. And then if you need multiple languages, you can upload that translate file, or that text file to subtitlestranslator.com and pick languages. It's Google Translate, so make sure you tell your audience that it is a auto translation and there may be some errors, but it's just an extra resource for somebody who might have a second language barrier, who wants that kind of extra reinforcement in a different language.
So Amy, thanks for this presentation. So what we have done here is we have received quite a few questions before when we were taking up the registration. So we have picked up top 5 questions for you and would like you to answer those. That would be really helpful for the participants. And then post that, we will take up the question and answer from the audience. So the first question is basically, on how basically does blended traditional learning methods and digital tools really work? And of course, everybody nowadays have this challenge as to how to measure these success. So if you could throw some light, that would be really great here.
Yeah, so blending can definitely work. So you have traditional learning methods. If you're talking about like as far as instructional design theories and things of that nature, I love using things like Gagne's 9 events and still kind of trying to put as much as possible into that online format. So you have your attention getter, like I was talking about before, you have your scenario, you're bringing in prior learning by having them self-reflect and things like that. So try to use those traditional methods across the board, no matter what you're doing. And then if you're trying to blend in person and online, have a purpose. So and be very clear with your students on the flow of the course. So for example, I had a negotiations training where we had them do an asynchronous part online. And it was the kind of the basics of negotiation strategies, negotiation tactics, things that they could learn in an online format very easily. And then that in-person component was a role play, which would have been very hard to do online, but it was a great asset because they had already learned so much that what used to be an 8-hour full day course turned into being able to do some of it online on their own time before the course began, and then practice and reinforce those things in a classroom setting by role playing the scenarios that they had learned about in the asynchronous online. But those students knew exactly what they were getting for part 1. They knew what the deadlines were. They knew what the goal of part 2 was, that they had to be prepared for it, knew what the schedule was for that course. And then, there was assessments and measurements in each thing. So how do you measure success? I'm a big survey person and I love surveys. And one of my biggest questions I always ask in the survey is, tell me one thing that you learned here today that you're going to use in your job. I always ask that. I ask that at the end of every survey. And then I try to follow up 3 months later, 6 months later, and I kind of take a collection of those things. So I analyze my data and I figure out what they learned from that job. And I kind of create a list. Then I send them back this survey in, 6 months, a year, or whatever. And I say, how many of these things are you still doing? And it's a collection of the things that people told me that they were going to do, or the one thing that they learned. And I have them just identify those things that they are still doing a year or 6 months later. And so that's how that was one of the concerns that a lot of you had, was how do you measure success over time? Well, ask them kind of what they plan to use and then follow up with them later. It's a really quick survey. It takes 5 minutes. And make sure you tell them it takes 5 minutes. Be like, hey, I just want to improve my training programs. There was one time like I gave out a raffle for a $5 Starbucks card. Like that was all it was $5 for one person. But it just motivated them to take the survey. So, you can keep it within budget, but people love, like, if they're going to take time out of their way to do surveys or they're really burned out, people love incentives. So, those kind of things really help. But measure your success, make sure you have assessments. You always look at your assessment data, and then always look at, surveys and things that you can do to get as much data as humanly possible.
Great, that was interesting. And let's move to the next question. And here we go. So this is about which is more effective in terms of digital classroom or hybrid learning models, and would like to know why.
So I absolutely love this question. And if I had a perfect answer for you, I wish I did. And I wish that somebody did, because I've looked at the research into this and there really isn't a good solid, hey, digital learning or classroom learning or hybrid is so much more effective. But I have read a lot of things that's just basically, what are your goals? Because it's all about the behavioral change that you want to see in your students and how you measure that. And then you need to pick the style of learning that gets you to those goals. So if digital is going to be the easiest way to do that, go for it. If classroom is going to be the easiest way to do that, go for it. If you have a whole bunch of learners that that they can learn online and this course makes sense online, but they hate it, they hate online learning, you're never going to have that same buy-in, right? So if you know that you're able to have an online course or a hybrid model because you know your learners just absolutely hate asynchronous online courses, try to advocate to say, hey, like this needs to be in the classroom. So I wish that I had, a fantastic answer for this. And I think it's a great question, but it's all about just, you're the expert. You've done your analysis, you know your learners, you know what your objectives are. You have to be the one to pick which is the most effective and advocate for it and say why and try your best to make it happen. And if you're stuck kind of in a box that your stakeholders and they don't really listen to you and they say, hey, we have to make this digital, then you have to be honest with them and say, okay, well, if it's going to be digital, here are my concerns. This is what I anticipate. And we may not get X, Y, and Z out of this course because we weren't able to do it a certain way. So,
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was helpful. And then we have third question, which is about what are the key challenges preventing the e-learning success?
So besides the stuff that I've already discussed, and I don't want to keep going on and on about the same thing with, motivation and learners and things. Also pay attention to, the time frame in which your learners are going to be engaged in this material. So do they have the time to do it? And do they have the resources? Do they have a computer or are they stuck doing it on a cell phone? And if they're going to do it on a cell phone, how does it look on a cell phone? Is it really hard to hit the buttons? Is it really hard to see the content? So there's kind of unique things that go into the e-learning success that you really have to kind of talk through. And again, this goes back to your data and your feedback. Try to ask your learners what problems they encountered. Ask the negative. Be willing to take negative feedback. What didn't you like about the course? What were the biggest things that you encountered? What device did you use? Did you do this at work? Did you do it right after work? Did you try to fit it on your lunch? So, be willing to just reach out and ask a couple questions. And you don't have to ask everyone either. You can just kind of nitpick a couple people. Just pick a couple learners and email them and say, hey, I'm doing a random test of my learners. Tell me what you know. So, just kind of understanding where they're coming from. There's a lot of challenges. Motivation is huge. I know somebody mentioned burnout. Burnout is huge. They just get tired of it. So, be clear on your agendas, be clear on your schedules, prioritize when you need to and let them prioritize and try to kind of keep out things that are in the weeds. So, and try to relate it back to their job, directly back to their job. Everything should have a purpose and everything should basically help them. You want them to be like, hey, taking this course is going to help you. I promise, do it. So, there's a lot of challenges, but just be open to making changes and be open to, again, that analysis phase is huge. Take time with it and advocate for it.
Thanks, Emmy. I guess you have, made a point where it is very important for, learners to have them, to have the feedback from the learners to make it really successful. And of course, the way you have put in terms of the questions that needs to be answered, I guess, a lot of people would like to answer what they didn't like about it or what they want as an improvement. That was really great. And then we move to the fourth question, which talks about what is involved in implementing an e-learning system in an organization and which factors basically to be considered while moving towards the e-learning culture, I would say.
So a lot of questions, and I kind of unintentionally answered this in the last, but one of the biggest things when you're first implementing whether or not this is going to work is to, again, know kind of what your audience, what their access is as far as again, are they going to be in front of a computer? Are they going to be on a phone? What e-learning tools do you have the budget for? What extra software do you have the budget for? So kind of your pieces, you have your resources. So the things that you can do online, you have your budget. So what resources you want and how much those are going to cost, where you're going to host it. You need your LMS. If you're going to be issuing certificates, how does that work? how do you issue them credit? So resources, budget, and then your tools, and then again your learners. Like what do their needs look like? Are they going to be able to do this? When are they going to be able to do it? So kind of create that strategic plan for implementation, everything that you need, what software and finances you need to make it happen, and lay it all out and try to think of everything. And I highly recommend just reaching out to someone in, even in a instructional design Facebook group and say, hey, like, I'm just getting started and I need help. Tell me how you did it. I have done that a ton when I've just had a question and I've just reached out, because starting from scratch is hard. And being the one that had to advocate for this is hard. So find a network, even if they're a whole bunch of random internet strangers. I'm telling you, instructional designers are out there and they're smart. So go find them, ask them questions. And then, well, I guess I kind of answered the second parts. So if you're moving to that e-learning culture, again, just ask your audience what their needs are and whether or not, you feel like this is going to be a good fit. Because if they're very, very stuck on that classroom atmosphere, you might need to kind of roll it out slowly and do kind of a hybrid. Like, okay, we're going to learn a little bit up front and then we're going to go to the classroom. And then get their feedback on that part and say, okay, well, now our next course, we're going to have more online components and maybe just a hybrid Zoom check-in, and so you can also slowly implement it as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. And then we move to the final question that we have picked up. This is about how can one motivate the employees to utilize the learning platform, basically to increase the learning adoption in an organization.
So I answered this a little bit. I also want to kind of talk about like the data piece of it. So make sure you're always getting your data. Again, when you want to do surveys, every time I put a survey in my course, it comes tied to the final assessment. So they have to answer my questions about what they thought about the class, and I try to make it short and sweet. Look at kind of a Kirkpatrick evaluation model, that type of thing. Make it short and sweet, but tie it to that final assessment. So if they're trying to get credit for the course, they have to take my survey and they have to fill out that information with their assessment before they get their certificate of completion. So they don't have a choice, they're stuck, right? And so I make sure that they're not going to finish the class until I get the data that I need. So I have my survey data, I ask the questions I want to ask, I have my assessment data, and then I can use those things to reshape my course, to figure out where they like, where they don't like. Another thing that you can do with data is when using kind of a mini module format, I can look at my data and say, you know what, everybody's dropping off at module 9. Why isn't anybody getting any farther than module 9? What about module 9 is making, 15 of my learners just stop? Well, then it actually gives you a chance to look at it and say, why aren't they engaged in this content? What's wrong with it? One time I actually had that happen, and turns out the functionality didn't work on Mac computers. Who knew? But nobody told me. They just stopped the course and were like, I guess it didn't work. But so I thought something was wrong with my course. No, it was just a button that didn't work on a certain type of computer. So really, again, kind of force that in any way, shape, or form as much as you can to get data. And I talked a lot about motivating learners, just understanding their needs, where they're coming from, what resources they have. It's a huge component of that. So just, if you don't know, ask. Go out and ask them what they need. It's the easiest way to do it. Even if it's just a couple people out of a sampling of 100, you just have to find a way to figure out who your audience is.
Great, thank you so much. I guess knowing your audience, knowing your learners is the best way to have the solution, which solutions you want to pick in terms of learning platform or say hybrid model, etc. And of course, understand how to increase the adoption as well. I guess knowing your audience would be very helpful to analyze, and of course the surveys and the data that you would be collecting. Let's move to the next slide. So basically, we are done with our presentation and questions we have covered. Now it's time to pick up our participants' questions, and I guess we have a couple of them in the chat. So let's pick this. So we have a question from Davis. So basically, would like to know, in the collaboration tools, was there a resistance to going to different platforms? Were there IT concerns about sending people to all these webinars?
That's actually a great question. We didn't get a lot of IT pushback. So make sure that when you're clicking to an external website, number one, you're setting your e-authoring tool so it opens a new window. So they're not, breaking away from the first one. And I prefer, like Padlet, you don't have to log in. So you just have them, giving a response, and it's a, cloud-based website. They don't need to put in any personal information to complete it. You make sure that they, you have very clear instructions that they need to put their name so you know who's contributing and things. But basically you have an account and your learner doesn't have to. So again, there's no personal information shared. It's, an open source websites. So I didn't get a lot of IT pushback, and if you are, you'll have to kind of investigate what their concerns are. Because yeah, luckily that hasn't been something that I have encountered. And it really not a lot of resistance either. People really like the engagement. They like things that they can take with them later. So, they can just kind of print their screen, or in Miro, they can print the mind maps. And, that was really helpful. And then I see your the additional question about identifying motivation through conversation surveys, all of it. It really depends on kind of what my resources were at the time. If I had people that I could call who were kind of in front of my face, or especially like with COVID, it just became so much easier to kind of do surveys. Again, a couple of times you got to bribe people. So I love doing like raffles, because it's like, there's a chance that you can win this, but I only have a budget of $10. So people seem to love that. Same with badges. Badges are kind of fun. People love to brag to each other. Or, sending out a email, just congratulating certain people, like a list of people that said, hey, these people completed this course in the first week, like, thank you. And just giving them a little recognition for the work that they did.
I guess you have, then we have a query from Seema. She would like to know, how does an LMS portal ensures continuous learning?
So I hope I understand your question correctly. So your LMS is going to kind of house all of that data for you, which is great, because then you're really kind of seeing, you can pull data reports on, like, this is the module where I was telling you, okay, everybody dropped off at module 9. I found that out through my LMS. So your LMS is where you can run kind of those reports. You run your completion report, how many people completed it. So it's kind of that data house. And then again, it's where students, they house all their courses. So they can see, like, these are the courses that I have left. This is what I completed. You can put badges in there, so they can be like, oh, I've taken 10 courses. I'm now, silver badge. So that's, your LMS is really kind of that house to get you, organized and keep all of that information and all of that data to be able to, help ensure your continuous learning, because your students, they know where to go in, they know where to find it, they know what's done, they know what's not done, they know where their certificates are, they know what their scores were. So, that LMS is really that house, to really help you with that organization and with that, all of that data.
Great. And I guess, Seema, you must have got your answer. And we have one more question in the chat box from Roque, which wherein she would like to know, how do you maintain engagement and connection when we are regionally distributed, with half of the learners online and the other half are in office calling into Zoom?
So have limited experience with this, but I love breakout rooms and I love random breakout rooms. So just having them, so you have your Zoom meeting and then you have certain areas where they're just gonna sit and talk, and then they're gonna come back and kind of reevaluate, and then they're gonna talk, and then they're gonna kind of come back to the full group. So, you know, I will admit this is an area of limited experience for me, but the breakout rooms have been really nice just to say, you know, you have to kind of stay engaged because they're going to be here and there throughout the course of the training. And your breakout room is going to try to connect you with people, different people, either every time or sometimes it makes sense just based on the activities to keep the same groups together. But you want to kind of mix it up. So you want those regional aspect people to be, you know, with in-office people and have them engaged with each other. Again, I apologize that I don't have more experience to draw from, but the breakout rooms have been really, really a nice part of that learning component.
Okay, I hope, Brookie, we have answered your question, and we have a couple of more questions. Ian would like to know, is gamification is just all about fun and how to bring in a balance?
I have never been a big fan of gamification. Only because number one, a lot of the topics that I've been addressing they seem very serious, and I don't feel like my learners would take them seriously in a game format. So I haven't done a lot of them because I just feel like you kind of almost lose learner buy-in if it's not appropriate for a game, because then you're kind of taking it and almost, yes, it's engaging, but are they going to take it seriously if it's in a game format? So definitely kind of evaluate your content first before you make that decision. And then I've seen very few examples of people that do it right. And people that do it right have taken so much time to put it together that it's very time consuming. And really at the end of the day, I've noticed that there's other ways to do it without having to take all this time and energy into putting it into a game. So, if that's something that's meaningful to you and you have the time and the resources to try to make it happen, and you know that that's a great topic and will engage your learners, then go for it. But I would really, really analyze if, that's where you want to be with your learning and how you want to invest your time. Because to me, it really does seem like it is more kind of fun engagement that you can get at the same level without turning it into a game.
Great. And Ian says, thanks, Amy, for a fresh answer on gamifications. We have another question from Mike, wherein he wants to know, platforms are coming with the features to pull so much of content from open web to consume. Then how you can make sure learning happening rather than just content rich situations?
So I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, just making sure that all of those kind of open web sources have a purpose and tie back to your learning objectives. And if they don't, try to keep them out. You really don't need to overwhelm your learner with a whole bunch of resources, because really at the end of the day, just making sure that they meet those objectives is what's important. So, getting rid of the clutter, I only had an hour, so I cut this out of my presentation, but being fancy just really serves you no purpose. Same with being overwhelming with resources. It really doesn't serve you a purpose. If you want to have I call it an appendices, with a whole bunch of resources after they're done, that might be a better way to do it. But the only resources and the only open web content that they should have access to are things that directly tie to the learning objectives. And then little, and if you do have a lot of those, and you still are kind of overwhelmed, then do small knowledge checks. And it doesn't have to be difficult, like a series of multiple choice questions. A knowledge check can just be a simple kind of one or two responses from students, even if it's an open box that nobody reads. I've done this before. Unfortunately, I don't have time, but I'll go in and look at the data, but it's not like an instructor is assessing this. But I have students say, what was your favorite part of the last 3 slides? That's it. It's just kind of something fun. And nobody's really assessing that. but it's just kind of keeping the learner engaged with just that portion, kind of giving them like a little brain break. And then, okay, now we're going to talk about this.
Great. I guess, Mike, we have answered your question. And we have one more question from Seema, and we just have 2 minutes left. So I guess you want to quickly pick this up. So basically, Seema would like to know what are some good transition plans when engaging online participants?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you talking like transition from online, like different parts of an online program or mini modules, things like that? I think I kind of just answered that a little bit with the knowledge checks. And again, just very small things that kind of give them a little bit of a brain break. But you're still kind of engaging them. You're still asking them to, that's what I really like about the mini module format is there's a couple times where if I need really good assessment data, like a formal assessment data, then I'll have the mini modules, but they'll each have their own set of assessment questions. So they don't have to take a big test at the end of it. They just do 1 or 2 questions after each module. So I'm assessing their learning, but then make sure that those questions reflect each part. So even if I'm on module 8 and I ask like 2 questions, one of those questions might be from module 4, so you don't necessarily have to be like, okay, they're only answered 1. So you're still getting that cumulative learning experience and you're still asking them cumulative questions, but you're doing it in a way that's just kind of, allowing them to have those brain breaks and to follow it a little bit easier. Also, when you do mini module formats, be very clear about the timeline. So like, yes, you have 9 of these, but you have like 3 weeks to do them. So do 1 a day, so really just kind of enjoy different creative methods of breaking up that content and giving people kind of a brain break.
Great. I guess we have answered Seema's question as well, and she would be able to relate that. So with that, we would like to close the webinar session. So basically, I would thank Amy once again for sharing your experience. We have definitely learned a lot from today's session from you, especially when it comes to e-learning. It actually plays an integral role, I would say, in organization in base of market dynamics. It also it begins with, say, seeing e-learning promises beyond the delivery of content and engaging it strategically to develop the knowledge, skills, and competency required to succeed. I get with the right mix of planning, promotions, technology, learning environment, and people and e-learning can help companies achieve performance at the speed of the business, I would say. And with that, a special thanks to all our participants for making this session interactive and successful. We will be sharing the webinar recording along with the feedback form. We will definitely love to hear your feedback as well. We hope to see you again in our next session with new topic. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write at sarah@stratbeans.com. Please do follow us on LinkedIn and the webpage we have mentioned here for the upcoming webinars and the recordings that would be available in the community that we have on human leadership and digital transformation initiatives. Thank you so much. Once again, thanks for your time and have a wonderful day. Goodbye. And thanks, Amy, for a lovely session for today. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a nice day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.